Let's go back in vintage history. Classic cinema TV. Wendy's Classic Corner. Wendy's Classic Corner.
Hello, welcome to Wendy's Classic Corner. I'm Wendy, and today I want to talk about a certain time period in classic film called PreCode. You may have heard this term before, but maybe you're not exactly sure what that means or what period it refers to. Never fear, I'm here to give you the lowdown about exactly what it means when a film is referred to as PreCode. I want to start out by mentioning that if you missed any of our shows, you can always catch all our episodes on my YouTube channel, Wendy's Classic Corner, or you can do a search for Wendy's Classic Corner on pctv21.org under the Watch Live tab. If you're interested in appearing on the show to talk about classic film, please follow me on my Wendy's Classic Corner Facebook page. So, let's talk about PreCode. PreCode refers to a period of time in film history prior to the enforcement of the Motion Picture Production Code. This is generally considered to be from 1927 to 1934, though most famous PreCode films are from the early 1930s. The production code was also sometimes called the Hays Code. Let me give you a little history behind the code. In 1922, studios became concerned after some risque films and off-screen scandals began to reflect badly on Hollywood with the general public. A Presbyterian minister, William Hays, was given the job to help crack down on scandalous content in film and to cut down on off-screen Hollywood scandals. In 1924, Hays suggested films should meet a certain criteria and requested filmmakers describe their film plots to him prior to production. In 1929, this was taken a step further when Catholic editor Martin Quigley from Motion Picture Herald and Father Daniel A. Lord, a Jesuit priest, created a code of standards which was approved by Hays and submitted to the studios. This code was about promoting traditional values as well as cutting out salacious and violent content from films. Some very specific criteria were sexual relations outside of marriage could not be viewed as right or permissible, criminal actions must be punished and could not elicit sympathy from the audience, authority figures must be treated respectfully, and particularly the clergy could not be portrayed as comic characters or villains. However, once the code was created, there was an issue with its enforcement. Jason Joy was head of the committee to enforce the code. He had little staff and was trying to review 500 films a year. Naturally, numerous violations of the code slipped through the cracks. The Hays office didn't have the authority at that time to order the studios to remove material and had to resort to simply asking them. Additionally, the censorship was disliked by many, and the studios themselves flouted the code in order to produce exciting and racy films that would appeal to the public during the Great Depression. This created a very short period in film where certain elements should have been censored from the code were actually relatively prevalent. For example, PreCode films might contain sexual innuendo, sexual relationships outside of marriage, prostitution, drug use, infidelity, violence, and even homosexuality. Also, bad people, whether they be gangsters or loose women, would actually profit from their misdeeds rather than be punished for them. PreCode films would also feature strong leading women characters, often being the central figure of the film rather than supporting a leading man. PreCode was one of the rare times this happened during the golden age of Hollywood. Unfortunately, in mid-1933, religious groups began to crusade against the lack of morality in films. Members of the Catholic Church called for a boycott on films, and a congressional bill was being prepared to introduce government oversight on motion pictures. Because of these threats, the studios reorganized the enforcement of the code, given Hays and newly appointed Joseph Breen control over the production code. Breen, a Roman Catholic, quickly took charge of the production code and began a serious effort to censor motion pictures in accordance with the original code standards. All film scripts now had to be submitted for approval, and Breen would require rewrites of anything he did not approve. This marked an end to the pre-code era, and films after this time frame would reflect the regulations of the production code. The production code was in place until approximately 1968. I hope that gives you a good oversight of what pre-code refers to. Now I'd like to present you with a couple of examples of pre-code films. Since I mentioned pre-code was a time for strong women, I'm going to start with one of the most powerful women in the pre-code era, Mae West. Where other actresses might go to the studios begging for acting jobs, the studios were coming to Mae West begging her to work for them. In fact, Mae West was instrumental in saving Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy and became one of the highest paid people in America, just behind William Randolph Hearst. The Mae West film I want to focus on is She Done Him Wrong from 1933. This film was adapted from Mae West's play Diamond Lil, which was a huge hit on Broadway. Mae West's plays were always very scandalous and caused extreme reactions from critics, and in fact, actually got her thrown in jail for a period of time. Instead of detracting the public, this caused a huge public interest. Even with the weak production code enforcement of pre-code, she still had to water down the sexual content to adapt Diamond Lil to film. She had to change the name also to sneak it past the code enforcers at the time. Mae West was a product of vaudeville, and that's well evidenced in her films. She created a certain persona full of snappy sexual innuendos and witty one-liners. Her clothing was reflective of the late 1800s, corseted with low necklines, form-fitting with these elaborate hats. Mae West is the main character in this film and in most of her films. The story revolves around her, and the men are all chasing her. Lou, who is played by Mae, clearly uses men to get what she wants in this film, mostly to get riches, diamonds, and the like. When we see her at the beginning of the film, she's shacking up with her boss, saloon owner Gus. This film is not especially heavy on plot, but seems just like a series of skits tied together. There are numerous men who are all after Lou. One man that seems rather resistant to her charms is neighboring city mission director named Captain Cummings, who is played by Cary Grant. In fact, if you caught my last show on Cary Grant, you would know that Mae West was instrumental in giving Cary Grant his start in film by giving him lead roles in 2 of her films. While Lou was carrying on with all and sundry, Gus is running a secret prostitution and counterfeiting ring to keep Lou in diamonds. He is assisted by a woman named Russian Rita, who does not get along with Lou, but her young lover, Sergei, played by Gilbert Roland, is smitten with Lou. A young lady comes into the saloon and goes to her room to try and kill herself, but is prevented by a bystander. She is taken up to Lou's room, who revives her and gives her a stern talking about how no man is worth suicide. Lou then passes her on to Russian Rita, who promises to find her a job, Lou not realizing that job will be in prostitution. Lou is summoned by a fellow called Spider to come and see her former lover Chick, who is in jail and missing her. Chick believes he is framed by another of Lou's admirers named Dan Flynn. Lou tries to assure Chick that she will wait for him, but Chick is anxious and decides to break out of jail. Meanwhile, Mae is trying to seduce Captain Cummings, and when she learns that the mission is in financial trouble, she sells some of her jewelry anonymously to give the money to the mission. She succeeds in luring Captain Cummings to her bedroom, but nothing happens. The police are now looking for Chick in Gus's place, and Mae is in danger because he realizes she is two-timing him with other men. There is also a surprise twist at the end of this film. Which makes this film a good example of pre-code is the sexual innuendos throughout, which are a trademark of Mae West. Also, Mae West's character is a gold digger who goes from man to man, using them to get what she wants, and then moving on to the next. There's also violence in this movie when Chick tries to strangle Lou, and also when Rita and Lou get into a fight, which results in the death of Rita. There's also another murder as well, and certainly our bad girl doesn't get punished for her behavior. It's an interesting film to see as it showcases Mae West's vaudeville talent and humor, and actually includes her singing as well. It's also interesting to see Cary Grant in a very early role where he appears fairly awkward and almost unrecognizable except for that voice. Check out She Done Him Wrong if you have the chance. The second PreCode film I'd like to suggest is what I consider a prototypical PreCode film, almost the poster child for PreCode in my opinion, and stars the queen of PreCode, Jean Harlow. In the early 1930s, Jean Harlow epitomized sexiness, and her role in this film, Red-Headed Woman, 1933, would showcase that. In fact, Jean Harlow does a phenomenal job in creating a character so utterly despicable with no redeeming qualities. In Red-Headed Woman, she plays Lil, who works as a secretary. She is not happy with her lot in life and wants to become rich. She has a friend/roommate, Sally, played by Una Merkel, who diligently tries to keep her from doing the wrong thing, but she continually disregards her. Lou is quite determined to snag Bill Legendry of Legendry Company, played by Chester Morris, who is happily married to Irene Leela Hames. She deliberately traps and seduces him at his home. Unfortunately, his wife comes home early from a trip and discovers them, which leads to a fight and trouble in the marriage. Bill vows to avoid Lil as he wishes to stay married to Irene. However, Lil has other ideas and continues to stalk him, including coming to his house while drunk and telling Irene how he wants her and not Irene. This again causes Irene to leave Bill. Bill is infuriated and pursues Lil to her house, where he proceeds to attack her. He is then overcome with remorse for his actions. After getting a divorce, Irene decides that she should give Bill another chance and comes to visit him. He's happy to see her, and Irene tells him that she cares for him and wants him back. But Lil emerges from the bedroom to inform Irene that she and Bill have just gotten married. Irene is devastated. Bill and Irene's society friends snub Lil, as does Bill's father. This infuriates Lil, and she uses a rich client of the company, Charles Gerstry, to attend a party at their house. She does this by seducing him and then blackmailing him. Lil is thrilled with the success of the party when everyone does show up. Unfortunately, she finds out that everyone immediately proceeds to Irene's house to make fun of her, and she throws a huge fit, making a scene in front of everyone and insisting she should go to New York, where Charles lives. This is agreed upon, and when Lil arrives in New York, she visits Charles, who tries to avoid her. However, she isn't taking no for an answer and pursues him. He eventually becomes enamored with her and wishes to marry her. But Lil is also shacking up with the chauffeur, Albert, who is played by Charles Boyer, under Charles's nose. Luckily, Charles finds out what she's up to because Bill's father has hired a private investigator to watch her while she's in New York. Bill shares the information with Charles, and both Charles and Bill both dump her. However, you will find that things do not turn out so bleak as one would hope for Miss Lil. This film has all the PreCode elements: a woman using sex to get ahead / gold digger, nudity. There is a scene where Lil is changing into pajamas and you can briefly see Jean Harlow's breasts. Violence and even a crime, as Lil winds up shooting Bill towards the end of the film. You really can't get a much better example of PreCode film than this one. And if you're like me, you will despise Jean Harlow after this film because she does such an amazing job of portraying this character. In fact, it took me years to get over my dislike of her after watching this film. I hope you will check out Red-Headed Woman. Hello? Sounds good. Send them in. Well, folks, it's time to hear what our viewers have to say. First up, we have Mary Ann from New York joining us via Zoom. Hello, Mary Ann. What PreCode film do you want to tell us about?
Oh, I think I have a good one, Wendy. It's called Night Nurse. It was produced by Warner Brothers, directed by William Wellman, with a screenplay by Oliver H.P. Garrett. It was done in 1931, and it has within its script gratuitous scenes of women undressing, men slapping women around, drunken mothers ignoring their children, women innocently sharing a bed together, a bootlegger who not only escapes the law but literally gets away with murder. Barbara Stanwyck is the star of this film. She is 24 and her career is on the rise. Her screen presence is commanding even at the very beginning of her career. In addition, Clark Gable is in this film, a very young Clark Gable at 30, and he is a menacing hoodlum. And I'll tell you, his performance is wonderful. He's frightening. In addition, we have Joan Blondell as Nurse Maloney. She becomes Barbara's buddy. Charles Winnegar as Dr. Bell, the head of the hospital. Clark, of course, plays a chauffeur, Nick, and Ben Lyon as Morty the bootlegger, who ultimately becomes a love interest for Barbara. The story begins with Barbara applying for a nurse trainee position at the hospital. The matron doesn't like her and turns her down since she didn't graduate from high school. However, she runs into the chief of staff, Dr. Bell, on her way out, and he just finds her positive and he wants her accepted into the program. And so because of her meeting with Dr. Bell, she is able to get in. She has a roommate, Nurse Maloney, Joan Blondell, and they live in the hospital dormitory. We have our first undressing scene as Barbara's being fitted for her uniform while one of the interns is spying at them from the hallway. There's a second undressing scene with both women, Nurse Maloney and Nurse Hart, getting ready for bed after they have snuck in after curfew. That doesn't go well with the matron, and they get in trouble. Anyway, Morty, Ben Lyon, comes into the ER the following day with a bullet wound. The only one currently in the ER is Barbara Stanwyck's character, Nurse Hart, and she takes care of him. She recognizes it as a bullet wound, and she said it has to be reported to the police. And he sort of cajoles her into not reporting it. And they kind of hit it off, and they become what he terms pals. So off he goes, and they bond, and she decides that she's not going to report it. At this point, the story turns very dark. She does graduate. Both she and Nurse Maloney have graduated, and they are assigned to the care of two young girls in the home of a wealthy family, and she is a night nurse, hence the name of the script. She realizes when she starts attending these young girls that they are systematically being starved to death, and she comes to find out that it's because there's a large trust fund set aside for the girls, and their mother, Mrs. Ritchie, played by Charlotte Miriam, and her boyfriend, the chauffeur, Nick, are after the children's money. The mother is a serious alcoholic, and Nick also keeps her, as he calls it, hopped up on narcotics. So she is pretty much out of it most of the time. The house is constantly filled with people and running late night parties. Nurse Hart is very concerned about this, and she runs into Nick, the chauffeur, at one point, and he threatens her. She wants to call the doctor in because she feels Mrs. Ritchie needs medical attention, as do the children. He refuses, and he smacks her and splits her chin. The little girl, one of the children, is dying, and Nurse Hart is trying desperately to get the mother to help. She goes to Dr. Ranger, who is the doctor in charge of the case, but he is in cahoots with Nick and the mother, and he has no intention of following her direction, and he accuses her of trying to blackmail him. She consults with Dr. Bell, who says, just monitor the children for their protection. And she plays along with Dr. Ranger for the children's sake. At this point, her friend Morty arrives in the house, and he's delivering liquor because, as you recall, he's a bootlegger. He sees her and the bruise on her face. He knows Nick and what's going on, and he becomes irate. She asks him to go out and get milk in order to give Nanny a milk bath, which she feels will help the child as the child is sort of slipping gradually into a coma. She is unable to find Dr. Bell, the head of the hospital, and she's in a panic. Dr. Ranger is in league with the mother and Nick, and so there's no help there. She does have several episodes with Dr. Ranger in which she shouts him down, she's a very formidable character. This is sort of a typical Barbara Stanwyck role in which she speaks her mind. And unfortunately, it doesn't get her anywhere. Her friend, Morty, goes out to find Dr. Bell and brings him in. When he gets there, Nick hits him and Nurse Hart as they attempt to give the child a transfusion. Morty arrives and he's sort of the knight in shining armor. He kind of saves the day and the little girl recovers. Nurse Hart wants to go to the police, but she's told she'll never work as a nurse again. And so she has this problem. She's put so much into nursing, it's what she really wants to do, and she's afraid of destroying her career. Morty offers to take her out for a ride and let her think about it before they go to the police. Meanwhile, we have an ambulance scene, and the ambulance pulls up to the hospital, and the two ER people come out and say, well, you know, this fellow is ready for the morgue. And isn't it interesting that he's wearing a chauffeur's uniform? They've murdered Nick and gotten him out of the way, which allows Nurse Hart to go to the police and swear out a warrant against the children's mother and get them into a safer environment away from their mother. And that's the way the movie ends.
Thanks, Marianne. Always love talking about Barbara Stanwyck, one of my favorites. Next up, we have Luis from Ohio joining us via Zoom. Hello, Luis. What pre-code film do you have to talk about?
Hello, Wendy. Thank you for inviting me to talk about my favorite pre-code film, King Kong, 1933. This was an American pre-code giant monster film directed and produced by Marianne C. Cooper and Ernest B. Skoczak, with special effects by Willis O'Brien and his assistant, Buzz Gibson. Produced by the famous Radio Keith Orpheum RKO Radio Pictures, is the first film to feature the monster King Kong. The film stars Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, Bruce Cabot, and Frank Riker. King Kong takes the viewers in a thrilling journey to a mysterious island. Fueled by curiosity, a filmmaker named Carl Denham embarks on an expedition accompanied by a young actress, Ann Darrow. There, they encounter a colossal creature known as Kong, which leads to unforeseen events when the creature is brought back to civilization. So let's talk a little bit about the production and the inspiration. Marianne C. Cooper was a figure larger than life. He was a war hero. He was captured by the Germans and then escaped dressed as a civilian. But the whole experience and dealing with all of these difficult environments caused him enough of a strong impression that he really wanted to do something with that. They started developing together, Skoczak and Cooper, a film that would be compelling from an emotional point of view and that would also bring astonishing, groundbreaking visual effects. So they shot the film in New York City and on the island of Hawaii. And these effects were really groundbreaking for their time, and the film, as a result, was a critical and commercial success. This was the first film where a musical theme was used of its own and not just background music. So that was an amazing first one for the film industry. It was also a film where for the first time you had sound effects, you had on one part of the audio, on a separate track, the voice, and on another track, the music. So this combination all at the same time was also something rich that made movies, starting from this one, very different. So Skoczak's wife, Ruth Rose, she had been a writer for the New York Zoological Society, and she took on an expedition to the Galapagos, and there she met Skoczak, who was the cinematographer for the New York Zoo. So together they started collaborating, and then she was brought in to co-write the screen for King Kong. She did a marvelous job. This had been started by Edgar Wallace, but Wallace passed away before he could do much with the script. So she and James Ashmore Krillman, the other author of the script, created and developed Cooper's idea, but she was responsible for many things, and she was also the real-life inspiration of Anne Darrow. She also created the character of Carl Denham and got inspiration for Carl Denham in Cooper. And she's also credited with the famous line, "No, it wasn't the airplanes, it was beauty that killed the beast." So, in terms of the cultural significance of this film explores the repercussions of human interference with nature. King Kong has become a beloved and influential classic in cinema history. It's one that has stood the test of time and is still considered one of the greatest films ever made. Rotten Tomatoes gave it recently a rating of the #1 favorite horror film or greatest horror film ever, and 56th in the list of greatest films ever. This film employed for the first time stop-motion animation techniques that had been pioneered by Willis O'Brien to bring the giant ape King Kong to life. Such meticulous craftsmanship and attention to detail in creating the massive creature and its interactions with the human characters set new standards for visual effects and paved the way for future advancements in the industry. The story of King Kong has become an enduring part of popular culture. This is a timeless tale of Beauty and the Beast. It explores themes of love, power, and the consequences of exploitation. King Kong embodies the spirit of exploration and adventure. The expedition to Skull Island, the encounters with all these dangerous creatures, and the journey back to New York City, they all evoke a sense of excitement and wonder that made a perfect escape from the depression that we were going through in the 1930s. The film taps into our fascination with the unknown and the thrill of discovering new worlds, making it a captivating and immersive cinematic experience. Now, despite King Kong being a gigantic monster, the film manages to evoke a sense of empathy and sympathy for the creature. King Kong is portrayed as a complex and tragic figure driven by its instincts and desire for companionship. This film really explores the blurred line between humanity and nature, challenging our perceptions of good and evil, and inviting viewers to reflect on the consequences of our actions. So King Kong contains graphic violence and horror elements, as well as a critique of exploitation and stereotypes, all of which pushed the boundaries of acceptability at the time. The scenes of King Kong battling other creatures and his ultimate confrontation with humans were considered very intense and shocking for audiences in the 1930s. The film's willingness to explore dark and violent themes, as well as sensual undertones between the beauty and the beast, were made possible by the more lenient censorship regulations of the PreCode era, allowing for a heightened sense of a spectacle and thrills. Now, while King Kong is often associated with the PreCode era, it was actually released in March 1933, just a few months before the enforcement of stricter production code guidelines. However, it still reflects the freer and more daring spirit of the PreCode era, as it was conceived and produced during that time. King Kong is a landmark film that pushed the boundaries of storytelling, visual effects, and audience engagement. Its enduring legacy and cultural significance continues and will continue to resonate with audiences of all generations. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for talking PreCode with us. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. I really enjoyed talking about PreCode with you and hope our viewers have enjoyed the show and have a better understanding of what PreCode means. And remember, if you want to be a guest on the show, you simply have to follow Wendy's Classic Corner on Facebook or email me at wendysclassiccorner@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Wendy from Wendy's Classic Corner saying so long, and here's looking at you, kid.
Why go anywhere else for classic movies?